Good morning. Welcome to another coffee chat. I am currently brewing some coffee for our chat. And today I thought that we could actually talk about ERP and OCD treatment and what the first handful of sessions could look like. Every therapist OCD specialist does kind of handle and conduct their beginning handful of sessions a little bit differently. So this is just my approach in my first handful of sessions, and of course also depending on the client themselves, on whether I feel like this is an appropriate way to start ERP for them. But I figure we can kind of just run down sort of like the general gist of what the first handful of ERP sessions could look like. So I'm going to finish brewing my coffee, and then we're going to sit down and we're going to chat. Beautiful today. And yes, I do still have my garland and some Christmas lights up. No worries. They bring me joy, and so they're sticking around. Okay, so yes, we are going to chat today about what the first couple of sessions in ERP can look like. I feel like this is a real common question that I get from a lot of new potential clients or active clients engaging in treatment with me, is their understanding / misunderstanding of what exposure response prevention OCD treatment looks like, because there's a lot of course, incorrect stigma out there that if I want to overcome a fear or a discomfort, then I just need to do it. So for example, I'm scared of heights, and so a lot of the misconception around that might be that just I need to go to the top floors of buildings, I need to stand on the edge of a cliff, and most times that does not work. And the reason for is because part of the ERP process is, of course, to lower our anxiety reaction to certain stimuli. But a lot of the times when I do go to a tall building, the top floor, or I ride on an airplane, I can do those things, but I'm still having a very high anxiety and fear reaction. And so ERP is not about getting rid of the fear. It is more about making the fear more tolerable, and also not interfering with the activities that I want to do, my day-to-day, or things that I find enjoyment from. For example, with my example of my fear of heights and riding in airplanes, I connect with the fact that I would like to see the world. I want to visit places. And so that helps me with connecting with and conquering my fear, is that I'm not just doing it just because. I'm doing it because I want to be able to see the world, and to see the world, I need to get on an airplane to see parts of the world. So things like that. But my fear of heights, my fear of flying, will never completely go away. And in fact, you'll notice ebbs and flows within your fear. So continuing with my own personal example of flying, a couple years ago, I went on many airplanes throughout the year, and I recognized as like the year went on and I got onto like, let's say like my 5th or 6th flight of the year, my anxiety was a bit lower just initially than the 1st or 2nd flight of the year. And I flew a lot that year. But then the following year, I only went on like 1 or 2 flights, and my anxiety was much higher. And so there's also a component there with an ERP of consistency. Now, I'm not saying that I can purchase flights all of the time to be able to consistently practice this exposure, this practice, but consistency is key. The more I practiced, the more I got on airplanes and didn't wait necessarily 6, 7, or even a year, the flight was a little bit easier. My anxiety was a little bit lower. And that's because I was getting used to that environment. A lot of the times with obsessions and fears, the stimuli is causing such a drastic and distressing reaction for us that we avoid. So continuing my flight example, one thing that could be is that I stop using airplanes when I travel. I only drive or take a train or a boat or whatever, right? I no longer fly. I avoid because of the distressing feeling that flying brings up for me. So this is part of some of like the psychoeducation. I know that I kind of went off a little bit on a tangent, but this is all part of, I would say, like session 2 actually, because session 1 with any client is always about intake questionnaire. I'm asking a lot of questions to get a good look at the big picture of everything that's happening and all contributing or most contributing factors. I can't discuss all of them within the first hour, but I try to discuss a lot of them to get, like I said, a good look at the big picture. What is happening for the client? What are they experiencing? What are the behaviors? What are other factors that are happening for them? All of those. So that's a lot of session 1. I'll probably sprinkle in some psychoeducation, but like that mostly depends on like the conversation between myself and the client, and what they're mentioning of what they've read or they've experienced or past therapy experiences. Otherwise, I pretty much leave session 1 to be just my own questions and questionnaire essentially. Session 2 is a lot of psychoeducation, like I've been talking about here, and like what we're expecting from ERP, exposure response prevention, and also I like to kind of highlight more about the stigma that, well, if I'm scared of it, like I just need to do it. And clients will report that like that doesn't work, and that does not surprise me, because like I said, if I ask clients to just do the really, really hard stuff, I'll never see them again. And I say that to the clients. If I ask you to do the really, really hard stuff and just trust, essentially, more than likely I will not see the client again. A lot of the ERP process is about a staircase effect. We identify anxiety provoking activities on a scale, an anxiety scale. So think about like a staircase, right? And with each step, that is how you get to the top. That is exactly what we're going to do with ERP, is that we identify what are some of our first steps, right? Because going back to my example of the airplane, flying could be like my tip top of the staircase. And what could be lower anxiety activities that I can engage with to start walking up the staircase. I also like to give an analogy with this like psychoeducation discussion of I heard it, I can't remember where I heard it from, but I heard it years ago, and it kind of just like stuck with me, and I feel like it's just like so perfect because naturally as humans, we want to make progress, and we want to make progress as quickly as possible. We want to jump up that staircase as fast as possible, right? And so I like to use this analogy that I heard a few years ago to kind of like really set the tone of like exactly like what we're doing. And so the analogy that I heard a few years ago is, if I asked you to stand outside your house and on the ground, just stand outside your house, and I want you to jump from the ground to your roof, could you do it? Now, of course, everybody says, no, of course not. Rightfully so. If you can jump from the ground to your roof, let me know. But most people, all the clients that I've worked with respond with, no, I can't. And so then I say, if I put a ladder from the ground to the roof, then can you get to the roof? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, well, how do you get to the roof then? And they say, well, I would climb the ladder. And I'm like, how do you climb the ladder? And rung after rung, hand over hand, foot after foot, and I will get to the roof. And that is what we're going to do. And that's what I want clients to think about with this approach, is that it's rung after rung, right? And so I like to use that analogy to kind of set sort of some of these expectations, so that we're not trying to blaze our way through an exposure hierarchy, and then clients aren't necessarily fully engaging in the treatment, or also like the treatment isn't effectively working, and that's because we're not effectively doing the treatment. So I like to talk with clients about that. Session 2 is a lot of like psychoeducation, prepping, maybe asking some more questions from like the intake. And a lot of that, yes. So psychoeducation is, I say it as psychoeducation in sort of like a double benefit, in the sense that clients now understand exactly what we're doing. Even if they've done ERP in the past, here's the other benefit, is that they now know how I am going to be working with ERP and how it could be different from previous therapists. And the other component that I've recognized is that sometimes without the psychoeducation, we don't recognize some like holes within clients' treatment. So I have had lots of clients that have gone through ERP in the past, or they're transferring from a different therapist into my care, and I recognize within our conversations that there are holes, which I like to say holes in their psychoeducation about OCD and ERP. And I like to say that like my psychoeducation, like within session 2, and of course psychoeducation continues throughout session, like we don't just do it in session 2 and then we're done with it. But taking the time in the beginning, session 2, maybe trickling into session 3, allows us to fill and sort of like level our foundation, so that we can continue to build up. I like to think a lot about the beginning phases of treatment as like building a house. I have never built a house before, but I know that it does require level ground. It requires a solid foundation. It requires framework. And so I like to kind of think about that like professionally in my mind as I'm talking with clients of where are we at in their treatment? Is the foundation solid? Are we missing things? So I kind of think about that personally, professionally, when I'm working with clients in their beginning phases of treatment. So, session 2, a lot of psychoeducation, a lot of breaking stigmas. Honestly, I also like to include in session 2, I want to know like not just me telling the client psychoeducation and breaking stigmas, but like I invite them to like tell me like what they know about OCD and ERP or what they've experienced in the past, what's worked, what hasn't worked, things along those lines, so that we can maybe mix it in or help correct understandings that aren't going to be helpful moving forward. So like I said, that's a lot of session 2, a lot of session 3, maybe trickling into session 3. Otherwise, session 3, I like to start creating the exposure hierarchy, really setting us up to identify what our first exposure challenge is going to be. Sometimes with clients, I am able to create the exposure hierarchy within session 3. Sometimes it does trickle into session 4. And the reason for this is because we're starting to build our staircase. But the important part with building our staircase is that, and this is like one of my favorite parts of like ERP treatment, because we get to think creatively of how we can tackle the tip-top fear or activity. So like, for example, I said earlier, or shared earlier, that I'm scared of flying. So some things that like I might want to explore of like, well, where is my anxiety at with drawing an airplane, watching a point of view video of riding in an airplane, or a point of view video of a pilot flying a plane. What about virtual reality? What about watching videos on planes just flying in the air, like from like the ground level? What about me standing outside if I live near an airport, or going and sitting outside an airport and watching planes take off and land? Like all of these creative aspects, essentially, like how, like where would my anxiety be at with that? And then we start like plotting those on our staircase. And typically, to begin the exposure challenge, so the exposure hierarchy isn't just done necessarily. There's a lot of times where we like will add to it, or subtract from it, based on how progress is going and where the client's anxiety is fluctuating as we get rolling with some of these challenges. So the exposure hierarchy is in constant construction, like throughout the ERP process. But to begin, I'm always aiming for an activity that is typically an anxiety level 3 or 4. And what I mean by that is like we rate these activities on a scale. I typically rate it on a scale of 1 to 10. 1 being like, it bothers me, but we can move on. Or 10 being like, this is absolutely horrible. I need to go to the ER. I also like to say that like meteor is hitting the earth. Like this is terrible. Tip-top anxiety. I know a lot of other therapists will use a rating scale of like 1 to 100. Me personally, I feel like that's just a little big. So for my clients, I like to mostly stick with like 1 to 10. But we're typically looking for a starting exposure to be around somewhere between a 3 and a 4, because I want the client to feel some of that discomfort, and not just like the discomfort of like, okay, well, like that's annoying, like stop pulling on my my shirt, like that's just like annoying, but like, you know, if you don't stop, then like whatever. I want to feel in the sense of like, okay, like I don't love this, I don't like this, but I can sit with it just a little bit longer, but I really would like it to stop. That's what we're looking for. So I would say that like that's typically where we want to start, and that's usually the I'm starting to create that like around session 3. Like I said, it's in constant construction throughout the ERP process, but typically started around session 3, so that like clients can start working on exposure challenges. Session 3, session 4. And then I would also say that when we get into session 5, I'm typically starting to recognize like, how is the exposure practice going? What are we recognizing? What do we need to tweak? What do we need to correct? There's usually a lot of like tweaking and correction within the beginning because clients are trying to get used to the ERP process. So you usually spend a good chunk of time there, but then I'm also focusing on starting to incorporate like mindfulness practices, talking about you know, the healthy ways of utilizing distraction techniques, things along those lines, so that the clients can feel a little bit more balanced in their beginning phases of treatment, instead of just, oh my gosh, my therapist is just asking me to sit in like a ton of anxiety, and this is really hard and really uncomfortable and I don't love it. And so that's usually where I'm like looking at like trying to incorporate like sort of like the balancing of a different skill and technique to help clients. But of course that comes with the caveat, the warning that we're not using this to decrease the anxiety from the exposure. So talking about very specifically how to use this balancing with, not directly with exposures, because I don't want clients to do the exposure and then immediately go into a mindfulness technique. That is not the ERP process. But I did my exposure work. A few hours later, yeah, I still feel a little bit of anxiety, but not nearly as much as I was during the exercise. Now I'm going to practice some mindfulness, things along those lines. So I like to talk a lot about how to appropriately use mindfulness and other coping techniques when in ERP process. So like I usually spend a lot of time like around session 5 and 6 with those components. So those are at least the first handful of sessions and what the ERP process could look like, how it looks like within my sessions. And like I said at the very beginning, I know a lot of OCD specialists and ERP therapists that their first handful of sessions aren't drastically different than what I just described. But every OCD specialist has their own little spin and take and how they conduct their sessions. So your therapist might have a slightly different approach, and that's okay. But I hope that this video helps you kind of understand and know what to kind of expect as you're beginning your ERP process. I hope you have a fabulous day. I hope it's sunny where you are, because it's sunny where I am. And I can't wait to enjoy the sunshine. I hope you get to as well. Have a fabulous day, and I will see you next time. Thanks for joining me.